The events that led to the Revolutionary War were largely started by the British King and Parliament trying to place new taxes on the American colonies. The British government felt that the colonists needed to help pay for the debts that Britain had built up while fighting the French and Indian War. Many colonists did not agree with all these taxes. They felt their taxes should be set by the governments in the colonies, not by a king and parliament who were an ocean away. One new tax during this time was started by the Stamp Act. It placed a tax on paper. This even included things like legal documents and newspapers. The colonists were not happy, and they protested. They said there should be no taxation without representation. The colonists were not represented in Parliament, so they did not feel it was right for Parliament to be making decisions about their lives. The colonists put together the Stamp Act Congress and said they would boycott or not buy any British goods until the Stamp Act was repealed. Other people started to form their own protest groups, like the Sons of Liberty. This group played a major part in enforcing the boycott. The Daughters of Liberty also encouraged people to not buy British products, and they helped people find alternative ways to meet their needs. The British were not about to let the colonists get their way. They passed the Townshend Act. This put taxes on things like paint, tea, and other goods. The colonists were now at the point where they were not going to accept any new taxes at all. The colonists boycotted this act too. Eventually, the British gave in and repealed the Townshend Acts, except for the tax on tea. The Tea Act became its own tax. It gave the British East India Company exclusive rights to sell tea in the colonies. This was one of the strongest British companies, and the British government wanted to make sure it remained financially stable. The colonists did not care why the new taxes were imposed. They had protested against the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, and they would boycott the Tea Act too. The British were selling tea for very cheap prices. The Sons of Liberty feared that the availability of cheap tea would threaten the effectiveness of the boycott. So they organized the Boston Tea Party and threw tea off ships and into Boston Harbor so it would not even be able to be sold. Other smaller tea parties took place in the area, but nothing as large in scale as the one in Boston. After the Boston Tea Party, Parliament passed a set of laws. These laws wanted to punish the colonists for their protests and boycotts. The colonists had their own name for these laws. They called them the Intolerable Acts. The colonists decided they had had enough. They did not want to see any new British laws. It was time they would do something about it. Each colony sent delegates to a Continental Congress. Here they would discuss how the colonies, as a whole, would respond to the Intolerable Acts. In 1774, people from across South Carolina met in Charlestown. They elected their delegates to attend the First Continental Congress. It was going to be held in Philadelphia. During this meeting, they also decided they would no longer be led by a royal governor who had been put in power by the king. They set up the General Committee of 99 to run the colony instead. The committee made Henry Middleton its president. After the battles of Lexington and Concord in 1775, the Second Continental Congress met. By this point, it was clear that a war with the British was coming.